I was halfway through my morning coffee when my daughter's call came through. The way she said "Dad," just that one word, strangled and desperate, made me drop the mug. It shattered on the kitchen floor, but I was already grabbing my keys. "Emma's in the hospital," she choked out. "She tried to. Dad, she tried to kill herself. She left a note." My hands shook so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. Emma, my granddaughter. The brightest light in my life since my wife passed 3 years ago. The girl who still called me every Sunday to tell me about her week, who hugged me like she was still 7 years old instead of 17. I drove the 40-minute route to County General in 23 minutes. My daughter Sarah met me in the waiting room, her face blotchy and swollen. She thrust a crumpled piece of notebook paper into my hands. The note was short. Emma's handwriting, usually so neat, sprawled across the page in desperate scrawls. "I can't do this anymore. Brandon's family said I'm trash. That a scholarship kid like me would ruin his future. They're right, Mrs. Whitmore said to let it go. She said they donate too much money. I'm so tired of being nothing." I read it 3 times before the words fully registered. Brandon Whitmore. I knew that name. His mother, Catherine, sat on the school board. His father owned half the commercial real estate in town. And apparently they decided my granddaughter, an honor student with a 4.2 gigapascals who'd already been accepted to 3 universities, was beneath their son. "Who's Mrs. Whitmore?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow. "The vice principal," Sarah said. "Emma went to her 2 weeks ago. Said Brandon had been touching her. In the hallways. In class. That he told her his parents said girls like her should be grateful for the attention." She broke down, sobbing into her hands. Mrs. Whitmore told her she was overreacting, that the Whitmores were important to the school. Something cold settled in my chest. I'd been a teacher for 32 years, a principal for another 8 before I retired. I'd spent 4 decades protecting kids. And now, when my own granddaughter needed protection, the system I'd believed in had failed her. Emma was in the ICU. They'd found her in time. Her best friend had gotten worried when Emma didn't respond to texts and had gone to check on her. But it had been close. Too close. I sat by her bed for 3 days. When she finally woke up, she couldn't look at me. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," she whispered. "I'm sorry I'm so weak." I took her hand gently. "Baby girl, you're the strongest person I know. But you don't have to be strong alone anymore. Tell me everything." And she did. Through tears and long silences, she told me about Brandon Whitmore, how he'd started pursuing her in September, right after she'd won the regional science fair. How she'd said no, that she had a boyfriend at another school, that she wasn't interested. How he'd laughed and said his parents told him girls like her always played hard to get because they wanted to seem like they had standards. He started touching me, she said, her voice barely audible, in the cafeteria, in the hallways. He'd corner me after class and press up against me, whisper things. When I pushed him away, he'd laugh and say I should be flattered. That scholarship, kids don't usually get noticed by families like his. She'd gone to Mrs. Whitmore in October. The vice principal had listened, then gently suggested Emma might be misinterpreting friendly behavior. "Brandon's family has been very generous to our school," Mrs. Whitmore had said. "His mother just funded our new STEM lab. I'm sure he didn't mean anything inappropriate. Perhaps you're reading too much into normal teenage interaction." I tried to believe her, Emma said. I tried to think maybe I was being too sensitive, but then it got worse. In November, Brandon had started a rumor that Emma was sleeping with him, that she was desperate to get into his social circle, that she'd do anything for a chance with someone from a real family. When Emma confronted him, he'd smiled and said his parents had advised him to be careful, that girls from her background might try to trap him with pregnancy or accusations. I went back to Mrs. Whitmore, Emma continued. She said I needed to stop making accusations against prominent families, that my scholarship could be reviewed if I kept causing trouble. My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just bullying. This was systematic silencing, institutional protection of wealth and power at the expense of a child. "The last straw was Wednesday," Emma whispered. "Brandon cornered me in the parking lot, said his parents wanted to meet with me and my mom, that they were going to offer us money to transfer me to another school, that Mrs. Whitmore agreed it was best for everyone," he said. She broke down. "He said trash like me didn't belong at Westfield Prep anyway, that we should know our place. I kissed her forehead. You rest now, sweetheart. Grandpa's going to handle this. Sarah grabbed my arm as I left the room. Dad, what are you going to do? I looked at my daughter. Single mother, working 2 jobs to give Emma opportunities, fierce and protective, and currently broken by helplessness. I thought about my wife, gone too soon, who'd always said the measure of a society was how it protected its most vulnerable. I'm going to burn their whole world down, I said quietly. And I'm going to do it by the book. I started with the note. I photographed it, made copies, and filed a police report. The officer who took my statement looked uncomfortable when I mentioned the Whitmore name, but I watched him write it all down. Then I went home and made a list. I'd been a principal for 8 years. I knew how schools worked. I knew where records were kept. And I knew that schools like Westfield Prep, private institutions that depended on wealthy donors, kept very, very careful records of everything. I also knew that where there was one victim, there were usually others. I started by reaching out to former colleagues, teachers still working at Westfield, administrators at other schools, counselors who'd transferred. I didn't accuse anyone. I just asked questions. Casual questions over coffee. How's the climate at Westfield these days? Still as politically sensitive as it used to be? The stories came out slowly at first, then faster. A teacher who'd been let go after filing a complaint about a student whose parents donated heavily to the school. A counselor who'd been encouraged to resign after reporting inappropriate behavior by a board member's son. A janitor who'd witnessed an assault in the locker room but had been told by administration to keep quiet or lose his job. Every conversation, I took notes. Every name, every date, every detail. Then I did something I'd learned in my 40 years in education. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request. Private schools that accepted any federal funding, including federal student loan money, had to comply with certain transparency requirements. I requested all disciplinary records, all complaints filed with administration, all board meeting minutes for the past 5 years. They had 30 days to respond. While I waited, I found the others. Social media made it easier than it should have been. I started with the counselor who'd been forced out, a woman named Jennifer Chen who now worked at a public school 2 counties over. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our towns. She was cautious at first, but when I told her about Emma, something in her face shifted. I'm so sorry, she said. I failed so many kids like your granddaughter. I couldn't. The Whitmores, the Prestons, the Hartford family, they basically own that school. Catherine Whitmore has been on the board for 12 years. She's brought in millions in donations. And her son, she stopped, took a breath. Brandon isn't the first. He's not even the worst. He's just the most recent. She told me about 3 other girls in the past 4 years. Girls who'd been harassed, assaulted, or bullied by students from wealthy families. Girls who'd been silenced with scholarship threats, grade manipulations, or outright intimidation. One had transferred schools. One had dropped out entirely. One had graduated but refused to talk about her time at Westfield. I tried to report it, Jennifer said. I went to the principal, to the board. Catherine Whitmore herself sat in the meeting where I presented my concerns. She smiled at me and said I clearly didn't understand how things worked at institutions that depended on philanthropic support. 2 weeks later, I was offered a generous severance package if I resigned quietly. Would you be willing to testify to that? I asked. She hesitated. Then, if it would help your granddaughter, yes. If it would stop this from happening to other girls, absolutely yes. I found the other girls next. It took patience. One didn't want to talk at all. I respected that and backed off. But 2 agreed to meet with me. They were in college now, trying to move past what had happened. But when I told them about Emma, about the note, about the suicide attempt, something hardened in their eyes. We thought we were alone, one of them said. Her name was Maria. She was a sophomore at State, studying engineering. I thought it was just me. That I'd done something wrong, or misunderstood, or I spent 2 years thinking I was crazy. She told me her story. Different boy, same family dynamics, same pattern of harassment, same administrative response, silence, denial, protection of the wealthy donor family. I'll help, she said. Tell me what you need. The FOIA request came back on day 28. Boxes of documents, board meeting minutes, disciplinary records, or rather, the suspicious lack of them. complaints that had been filed and then mysteriously lost, donation records that showed exactly how much money the Whitmore family had given the school over the years. I spent a week going through every page. I made spreadsheets. I created timelines. I cross-referenced complaints with board meetings and donations. The pattern was clear and damning. Every time a complaint was filed against a student from a wealthy donor family, it disappeared. Every time a teacher or counselor pushed too hard, they were reassigned or encouraged to leave. And the Whitmore family sat at the center of it all, Catherine on the board, her husband's foundation funding new buildings, their son untouchable. I took everything to the police detective who'd taken my initial report. He looked through the documents for a long time. "This is bigger than one incident," he said finally. "This is systematic. But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Morrison. Prosecuting the Whitmores is going to be difficult. They have resources, lawyers, influence." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm not relying on just the police." I'd been a teacher long enough to know that change in education comes from pressure from multiple directions. So I applied pressure. I sent copies of everything to the State Education Board with a formal complaint about the school's accreditation. I sent copies to the local newspaper and to 3 investigative journalists who specialized in education reporting. I sent copies to the Federal Department of Education with a complaint about Title IX violations. And then I did something that terrified me. I sent the whole package to a lawyer who specialized in class action civil rights cases. Her name was Rebecca Torres. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and fierce. She looked through my documentation, interviewed Emma, spoke with the other victims, and reviewed the school's records. "This is a slam dunk," she said. "Not just against the school, against the Whitmores personally. Their son committed sexual assault. The school aided and abetted by covering it up, and they did it as part of a pattern that prioritized donor money over student safety." She looked at me directly. "Are you prepared for what this is going to mean? The Whitmores will fight back. They'll hire investigators. They'll try to discredit Emma, discredit you, discredit everyone involved." I thought about Emma in that hospital bed. I thought about my wife, who would have been furious and heartbroken and ready to fight. "Let them try," I said. The first story hit the local paper 3 weeks later. Local prep school accused of covering up sexual harassment to protect donor families. It was careful, factual, sourced. It named no victims but outlined the pattern of complaints and cover-ups. The response was immediate. The school issued a statement denying any wrongdoing. Catherine Whitmore appeared on local television, poised and confident, talking about how the school took all allegations seriously but wouldn't bow to unfounded accusations from people seeking attention or money. Then the second story broke. Former counselor speaks out about pressure to silence sexual assault victims. Jennifer Chen went on record. So did Maria. So did the teacher who'd been fired. That's when things got interesting. The Whitmores hired a crisis management firm. They had their lawyers send cease and desist letters. Catherine Whitmore gave interviews talking about the difficulty of running a prestigious institution in an age where anyone could make accusations. But I'd spent 40 years in education. I knew how to document everything. Every piece of evidence was backed up multiple times. Every witness statement was corroborated. Every timeline was verified. The State Education Board launched an investigation. The Federal Department of Education opened a Title IX inquiry, and Rebecca Torres filed the lawsuit, not just against the school, but against the Whitmores personally for their role in enabling their son's behavior and orchestrating the cover-up. The local news became regional news, became national news. Elite prep school accused of protecting sexual predator to keep donor money was a headline that traveled. That's when other victims started coming forward. Not just from Westfield Prep, but from other schools where the Whitmores had influence, where their foundation donated money, where their friends sat on boards. The pattern was bigger than I'd imagined, bigger than just Brandon. The Whitmores and families like them had created a system where wealth meant protection, where being from the right family meant being above consequences. Emma was out of the hospital by then, doing therapy, slowly healing. She read the news stories with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I thought it was just me," she said one Sunday when she came over for dinner. "I thought I was the only one who wasn't strong enough to handle it." "Baby girl," I said, "you were strong enough to survive. You were strong enough to tell the truth. Now we're going to be strong enough to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." The trial preparation took months. Brandon Whitmore was charged with sexual assault. Mrs. Whitmore, as vice principal, was charged with failure to report and obstruction. Catherine Whitmore faced civil liability for her role in the cover-up as a board member. Their lawyers were exactly as aggressive as Rebecca had predicted. They tried to paint Emma as a troubled girl seeking attention. They tried to discredit the other victims. They tried to argue that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But we had the documents. We had the testimony. We had the pattern. And we had something else. We had the moral high ground. And we weren't backing down. The criminal trial came first. Brandon Whitmore stood in front of a jury and heard 3 young women testify about what he'd done to them. Heard teachers and counselors testify about complaints that had been buried. Heard his own texts read aloud. Messages where he bragged to friends about putting scholarship trash in their place. The jury took 4 hours to convict him on all counts. The civil trial was messier but even more satisfying. The school tried to settle multiple times, but Rebecca pushed back. This wasn't about money. It was about exposure, about change, about making sure every parent knew what had been happening. When the school's lawyers presented their financial records, showing how dependent they were on donations from families like the Whitmores, it backfired spectacularly. It proved exactly what we'd been saying. The school had prioritized money over student safety. The jury awarded damages that made headlines. More importantly, the settlement terms required the school to implement comprehensive reforms: mandatory reporting procedures, independent oversight, transparent complaint processes. Catherine Whitmore resigned from the school board. The vice principal was fired. The principal took early retirement. But the real victory came later, quieter. Emma got a letter from State University. They'd seen the news coverage. They wanted her to know that they had resources for students who'd experienced trauma, that they had a zero-tolerance policy for sexual harassment, that they'd love to have her join their honors program with a full scholarship. She cried when she read it. Happy tears this time. "I'm going to accept," she said. "Not because I'm running away, but because I'm moving forward." 6 months after the trial, I got a call from a woman I didn't know. She was a counselor at a private school in another state. She'd read about our case. "We have a situation here," she said carefully. "A student who's being harassed by the son of a major donor. Administration is reluctant to act. I was wondering if you could send me the documentation from your case, the procedures you followed, the legal precedents." I sent her everything, and I told her what I'd learned, that institutions protect themselves until the cost of protection becomes too high. That silence is a choice. That one person standing up could start an avalanche. "Document everything," I told her. "Find the other victims, build the case, and don't back down, no matter how much pressure they apply." 3 months later, I read that another school had launched an investigation into harassment allegations against a donor's son. 6 months after that, another. A year later, there was a documentary about the systemic problem of wealthy families using donations to buy protection for their children's behavior. Emma's doing well now. She's thriving at State, made Dean's List her first semester. She volunteers with an organization that helps sexual assault survivors navigate school reporting systems. She talks to parents about recognizing when their kids are being silenced. Last Sunday, she came over for our weekly dinner. We sat on the porch afterward, watching the sunset. "Grandpa," she said, "I was thinking about that note I wrote. In the hospital." I tensed. We didn't talk about that day much. "I wrote that I was tired of being nothing," she continued. "That they were right. That I was trash." She was quiet for a moment. "But they were wrong. And you proved it. Not by saying it, but by showing me that my voice mattered. That I mattered enough to fight for." I took her hand. "Baby girl, you've always mattered. The Whitmores tried to make you believe otherwise, because small people with power can't handle strong people without it. But you've got something they'll never have." "What's that?" "Integrity, courage, and a grandfather who will go to war for you every single time." She laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in a long time. People ask me sometimes if it was worth it. The stress, the time, the legal battles, the threats, the attacks on our family's reputation. They ask if I wouldn't have preferred to just let it go, to let Emma heal in private, to move on. I think about all the girls who came forward after Emma. the ones who'd been silenced for years, who finally felt safe enough to speak up. I think about the policy changes, the mandatory training, the independent oversight committees that now exist because we refuse to be quiet. I think about Emma, strong and fierce and using her voice to help others. And I know exactly what my wife would say if she were here. She'd say that protecting children, all children, not just the ones from wealthy families, is the most important work there is. She'd say that institutions that fail in that sacred duty deserve to be torn down and rebuilt. The Whitmores still have money. They still have influence in some circles. Brandon served 18 months in a minimum security facility and is out now, living on his trust fund. His parents have largely retreated from public life, but they don't have impunity anymore. They don't have the ability to buy silence. And every school in the region knows that there's a line that can't be crossed, no matter how large the donation check. Sarah asked me last month what I'd learned from all of this. We were at Emma's high school graduation. She'd gone back to get her diploma with her class, walked across that stage with her head held high. I learned, I said, that evil thrives when good people decide the cost of fighting is too high. I learned that institutions will always protect themselves unless we force them to protect our children instead. And I learned that my granddaughter is stronger than any trust fund, any donation, any family name. I paused, watching Emma celebrate with her friends. But mostly, I said, I learned that when someone you love is in danger, you don't calculate the cost. You don't weigh the odds. You just fight, with everything you have, for as long as it takes. Emma's at state now, like I said. She calls every Sunday, like always. She's thinking about law school, says she wants to help families like ours, kids like she was. I told her she'd be brilliant at it. And I meant it, because my granddaughter isn't trash. She isn't nothing. She's a survivor, a fighter, a young woman who looked into the face of institutional corruption and systemic abuse of power and refused to be silenced. The Whitmores tried to break her because they couldn't control her. They failed, and that's the real victory. Not the convictions, not the settlements, not the policy changes, though all of those matter. The real victory is Emma, thriving and strong, using her voice to help others find theirs. That's justice, that's redemption, and that's something no amount of money can buy. Have you ever faced a powerful person who thought they could crush you because of your background? Have you ever been told to stay silent because speaking up would be too costly? I hope you haven't. But if you have, I hope you remember this. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And there are people who will stand with you, who will fight for you, who will refuse to let the powerful silence the powerless. That's what I learned in my 40 years in education, and what I relearned fighting for my granddaughter. Justice isn't something the powerful grant the powerless. It's something the powerless demand, and keep demanding, until the powerful have no choice but to listen. The battle between right and wrong isn't over. It never is. Every generation faces it in new forms, with new players, new tactics, but the fundamental truth remains. We have to choose which side we're on, and then we have to fight like hell for that choice. I chose my granddaughter. I chose truth. I chose justice over money, over influence, over the comfortable silence that protects institutions at the expense of children. I'd make the same choice every single time. And if you ever face that choice, between protecting someone you love and protecting your own comfort, between speaking truth and keeping quiet, between fighting a powerful system and accepting how things are, I hope you remember Emma's story. I hope you remember that one person standing up can start an avalanche, that documentation and persistence can overcome wealth and influence, that the truth, defended long enough and loud enough, eventually drowns out the lies. Because at the end of the day, that's all we have. Our choices, our courage, and our commitment to protecting the people we love and the values we believe in. The Whitmores thought they were untouchable. They thought money and influence put them above consequence. They were wrong. And every family like them needs to learn that same lesson. Your donations don't buy you the right to hurt children. Your wealth doesn't make you exempt from decency. Your power has limits. Those limits are people like Emma, like Sarah, like every parent and grandparent who loves their child more than they fear the powerful. Those limits are people like me, who spent 40 years teaching and learning one fundamental truth. Children are sacred, And anyone who hurts them, anyone who enables those who hurt them, will answer for it. That's my promise. That's my legacy. And that's the lesson I hope the Whitmores never forget. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who needs to hear it. I hope it reminds you that justice is possible, that fighting back works, that standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's costly, is always worth it. And if this story touched your heart, share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that hope and justice still exist in this world. Share it with someone who's being silenced and needs to know their voice matters. Because it does. Every voice matters. Every person matters. And no amount of money or power can change that fundamental truth. God bless you all. And may you always have the courage to fight for what's right, no matter the cost.